of our discussion on Panorama, looking at dialogue as a way to bring people together, united. And we have in the studio a public affairs analyst, Mohammed Musa. Thank you for joining us, Musa. I can call you Musa, right?
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you for having me also.
All right, you have to speak a bit loud. I could barely hear you.
All right, thank you for having me, and good afternoon to you too.
You're welcome. Yeah. All right, when we look at Nigeria as a multilingual, multi-ethnic, and of course a multi-religious society, of course, and taking a look at our diversity, which is supposed to be our strength, but we get to see division here and there. What's your thought regarding how we can harness this unity, diversity, as a formidable force?
Well, from my own perspective, and I wish to go from the legal perspective before any other thing, as it is the paramount thing that guides human existence in a society, like the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria being the ground norm. When we check the Chapter 2 of this Constitution, we see the fundamental objectives of directive policy. In this Chapter 2, the motto of Nigeria is highlighted as unity and faith, peace and progress. And also the issue of national integration, irrespective of gender, ethnic, religious, or linguistic differences. So if we really want to see advancement, in coexistence in Nigeria, we have to focus on these things that are already highlighted to us by law. And one important thing we also need to check is learning from the international communities. For example, when we look at Canada, Canada has a community, or let me say an organization called the Trust and Reconciliation Committee. And this committee solely deals with clearing historical differences. Yeah. One of the main challenges we have is differences in Nigeria. Yeah. Are religious differences, which politicians and it is used in the political space to gain advantage of the masses, to divide them and rule them. So if we follow from this, the laws that are outlined in the Constitution and also international communities, then the existence of dialogue is very, very important in peaceful coexistence. Okay,
now that you've mentioned dialogue, we get to see communal clashes, which has led to displacement of people. And of course, we've seen community heads, being encouraged to use dialogue as a means to bring the people together. But would you say, if you look at the narrative for Nigeria over time, has that dialogue really paid off?
Well, in Nigeria, it is funny, and I'm sorry to say, a lot of things don't really work. They are just on the paper or, on the news, this is happening. But in the reality, such things don't happen. Because like the Kaduna and the Jos differences, when dialogue was used, okay, let's say it worked to some certain extent, but in Nigeria, things don't last for long. We don't do, proactive things that will last us a long time or take us a long period without reviewing that, because the issue of check and balances isn't the doctrine or the principle isn't really upheld here in Nigeria. But yeah, to some extent, I would say it works. But the issue we have on ground of headsmen, I don't really think the dialogue is really working in that aspect. But maybe back in the days, it worked more than it is working now.
Okay, it's good you mentioned that to some extent, the dialogue, works. Which we have seen actually. But let's look at the principles that guides our existence in the aspect of patriotism, tolerance, religious tolerance for one another despite your religion or your tribe. These are virtues or values rather that will always reminded of all the time. What other means, should citizens adhere to in order to live together as brothers and sisters?
Okay, you mentioned the tolerance, which is very important. Yeah, I believe that is important. But apart from tolerance, there are other ways in which the government can make this coexistence more peaceful, and also the people themselves. One of the main components of dispute in Nigeria is the issue of boundaries, resources, and material things, which is also kind of part of resources. So the thing that I suggest will work when it comes to, a more peaceful environment is the government seeking value of these NGOs, because these NGOs are really used and they are valuable in other jurisdictions.
Yes.
For example, there is a youth movement that is called Tefia Matasa. It is, an emerging movement, if I may say. Such movements of the youth, because the youth are the people with the agitation.
Yes.
So if such movements would be shielded and carried along by the government, like the way it is done in Tunisia, because of the Arabic Spring, the youths are at the forefront of decision making.
Yeah.
And if the youths will be carried along, then the issue of youth-led protest will be subsidized. You understand? Because they know they have a say. They know when they talk, it matters. But if we don't, integrate stuff like this in our system, then it will be very, very hard for us to see, peace in the community as it is seen in other jurisdictions.
Yeah,
So,
because they're actually,
Yeah.
talking about the youths now, they're actually used as a tool to perpetrate some of this violence, which we get to see. I'm glad you mentioned the youths, because they have a role to play. What about the aspect of reorientation? Since you said it begins with you and I, ourselves, so reorientation, that's a strategy, right?
It is actually, it
Okay.
is. Reorientation, rehabilitation, these are things, for example, these IDP camps, these people that have been internally displaced because of, such conflicts that are going on. If these people will be rehabilitated, they will have a proper sensitization, they'll have a different mentality, then we have a very good hope that they will impact the society positively.
Yes.
Like these Boko Haram people, that some of them will come and say, okay, they are not doing the bad stuffs anymore. Okay, if we accept them to the society, that is risky. But if we have a plan on how we will, manage them, sensitize them, educate them, and make them impact the society in terms of socially, mentally, economically,
Yes.
and in every other aspect, then these people are not totally useless.
Indeed, Mohammed, because I recall growing up,
Yeah.
we used to live, as one. Despite the festival, if it's Christmas or
Yeah.
Salah celebration, there's that unity of
Yeah.
love, of togetherness.
Exactly.
How can we, how can society rather imbibe that in children of today? Because it starts very young. You have to imbibe those values, in the children.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that is very important, because such practices also exist in jurisdictions like India, where they have their village council, also known as the panchayats. They call it the panchayats. In the olden days, the way we hear it from our parents, when a child, does anything wrong, it is not only their parent that is responsible to discipline them. Your neighbors can do it, your relatives, but in the modern day living and the life we find ourselves in now, it is very hard. You cannot just discipline your friend's child or your sibling's child.
Yeah.
It doesn't really work like that. And I really think it is because of the, westernization that we are admitting to, because we watch movies, we see these things online, in other jurisdictions like the US or the European countries, some of them, a parent cannot just hit their child, which is also part of our, like laws in Africa, because if you check the African Charter, there is something that talks about morality, you understand, but in these other jurisdictions, it doesn't exist. So I think we really want to be civilized too much that we forget where we come from or who we are, and we really want to emulate from these Western cultures, and it doesn't really work for us. It doesn't really work for us.
It doesn't, Muhammad, and that's where parents have a very strategic role to play. Parents, every time we hear they say religious leaders or community heads have that strategic role for peaceful coexistence, but when you start imbibing that culture, very early in the children, it works. Parenting is very crucial in all that we've said, because they said family values is what shapes society. So how can, parents begin to guide their children beyond, and also even in schools, let's not leave the schools out, they have a role to play. They teach children civic education and all of that. How can they imbibe that culture of peaceful coexistence among the younger ones?
Well, I believe it is easier to do that in the olden days than it is easy to do that, because information is now rapid. It spreads rapidly in this modern world. In the olden days, not everyone has a phone. To even watch a movie is something that is hard. But right now, these kids at their tender age, they have access to social media. They watch whatever they want to watch, and they emulate what they want to watch. Sometimes the subconscious things that enters a child works more on them than the thing you sit down and you tell them. But something that I think is very important is us remembering our history and teaching these children what the history entails and what was the practice back in the days and how it actually impacted the society, not the way it is now. Because you see, when we look at Rwanda, after their genocide, there was the creation of the Gakaka Court in 1994. So these children will grow up knowing the importance of such practices, but if we don't teach them, then it will just be, it wouldn't have much value to them. Because what they see on social media is what they will emulate more, and if they don't know this history, they'll just see it as story, like fairy tale, not something they will really value. So what I think is very, very important is reminding them of their African heritage and their history. That will really impact their way of thinking.
Indeed, where you're coming from will shape where you're going, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mohammed Musa. He's a public affairs analyst and will continue to spread the message on NTA that united we will stand and divided we will fall. Let's take a break. We'll be back.
Thank you.
It will